Administrator Fugate, earlier this year I introduced and the House passed the Disaster Save Act, which would increase FEMA's small project threshold to $500,000. Do you support this legislation, and could you describe how you think it could speed up disaster recovery, reduce administrative burdens, and lower costs?
Mr. Chairman, I supported you when you had it at $1 million, but I understand that people were a little squeamish about that. But the idea that on small projects, we pretty much end up spending about as much money sometimes on small projects as we do big ones because of the overhead. By increasing the threshold, I believe by going to $500,000, I think FEMA says that's going to be about 97% of what we actually do. It reduces the overhead burden on local governments and states. I don't think it increases the risk to the federal taxpayer, and the oversight really isn't saving us. If we're going to do that kind of oversight, let's do it on the big projects, and you gave us great tools to do cost estimates and speed that up. But on smaller projects, I think the risk of not providing that degree of oversight is more than compensated by the controls in place at state and local government, and the savings would be tremendous. Again, FEMA estimates that of the projects they write, they could get almost 97% of what they write into that threshold, which reduces burden of regulatory oversight for state and local governments, reduces FEMA's cost in administering the grants, and I don't think increases the risk to the taxpayer by eliminating a lot of that process.
Sure. We got a project right now. We have back in my district where the administrative costs that they're spending will be more than what they're trying to recover.
Oh, absolutely.
Since September 11, 2001, DHS has provided over $40 billion in preparedness grants to state, local, and tribal governments to strengthen their preparedness to terrorism and other hazards. Chief Sinclair, as a former mayor, I know how critical assistance to firefighters' grants can be to local fire stations in obtaining the personal protective equipment that they need. Can you tell us how fire grants and other preparedness grants help our first responders prepare to manage the consequences of all hazards, and what might happen if those capabilities were removed or diminished?
Thank you very much, Chairman Barletta, for the question. In my written testimony, one of the things that we referenced is the National Fire Protection Association just did their fourth needs assessment of the fire service. And one of the things that points out are all of the deficiencies that still currently exist. The AFG and the SAFER grant programs have been very good for providing opportunities for people to upgrade their equipment. I can tell you that in 2007 and 2008, at my local organization, we were able to put in an AFG grant that allowed us to replace very essential bunker ensembles and the self-contained breathing apparatus ensembles that we were unable to at that particular time. What that allowed us to do was take two organizations, a city and a fire district, merge those together and become a much more effective and efficient system for the community. And it was the seed money from that purchase that got us working together, and it ultimately led to a merger. The issue is that you broaden that out to the Shusgap and UASI money, and one of the things that we see there is that you've got people that are looking at this from an all hazards perspective, and they're working together. One of the things that we saw locally is that by working together, and it allowed us to go through flooding events, wildfire events, and a blizzard event where every road into our community was cut off and the just-in-time supply piece cut in. So we wound up working with the health department, local law enforcement, and all of the other providers. But it was those seed money that allowed us to begin that planning process, and it made us a much more resilient community.
Thank you.